core shame. It's this fundamental belief that you're broken, you're not good enough, you're not worthy of love. They want to avoid the shame. And so what'll happen is the codependent will cut off the relationship from the person who's trying to help them. For codependents and narcissists, limerence that is exponential because it takes a depressed, lonely, sad codependent and all of a sudden fills them with this euphoria, but only one at the end of the day gets to be happy.
Hi， 大家好，我是 Sherry。今天要跟大家谈的是吸渣体质。我们都知道，很多人说，某个人有吸渣体质，就是常常会吸引渣男渣女。那到底什么是吸渣体质呢？今天我很有幸的采访到了渣男渣女磁吸症的这个作者 Ross Rosenberg， 他是一个教育硕士、临床心理治疗师。然后非常特别的就是他会写这本书，就是因为他自己曾经爱上一个自恋型人格的人。那他自己在分析他过去的一些关系中，他慢慢的看到了，好像似乎都有一些共同点，自己去梳理，发现自己就是可能是这种吸引渣女的体质哦。所以最后他写了这本书。这本书里面有非常多的论述，那我觉得它的重点就是能够让大家很清楚的看到为什么我会有吸渣体质，然后我可以怎么样透过理解这个论述而让自己能够走出这段非常渣的关系哦。所以接下来就是我跟他的访谈，请大家看下去。Mr. Rosenberg, it's so nice to have you on the show. I read your book. This is the Chinese version of it. It's called The Human Magnet Syndrome. Can you very quickly explain what that is and why you wrote this book? Because I know this subject is close to your heart.
So I had, after my second divorce, in a therapy session I had, it's like, what is wrong with me? I fall in love, and all of a sudden I later find out, these women are not who they said they were or who they seemed. And I was talking to the therapist and she had no clue. And so I had no answers. And the more I talked about it, the more I saw that codependents who are caregiving people, who are altruistic, who tend to be sacrificial, tend to be really nice when others aren't nice. I noticed that not only was I that way, but I noticed that there was this pattern that, like a dancing couple dancing a tango, as much as there needed to be a leader, someone who took charge of the dance, for the dance to work, there needed to be a follower, someone who was moldable and selfless. And I all of a sudden figured out maybe there's a pattern here that codependents always fall in love with the opposite, someone who can control them. And that's when, because I had a disagreement with my publisher over the name of a training that I wrote about this, they wanted me to have the name of the book, something I absolutely refused to have.
Can I find out what it is?
So they wanted to call it Emotional Manipulators and Codependents, Understanding the Attraction. That was the name of a training that I was giving because I figured this stuff out, and I wrote a training. I started traveling all around the United States, giving it to other therapists, and they were going, wow, this is real. This makes sense. And in our negotiations, then when things got difficult, I woke up the next day with this idea, human magnet syndrome. Mm-hmm. The opposite, like the North and the South Pole, the opposites. And that's how I got that idea, because I was about to break my contract and it was going to get messy. And I got really creative at the last minute. But it really is, it explains that codependents who are pathologically caregiving, they automatically, unconsciously are attracted to narcissists. Not because they like being hurt or ignored, but somehow it feels familiar, and familiar feels unconsciously safe.
You actually talked about a broken picker in your book. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I thought that was very interesting, because that traces back to our childhood experience, right?
Yeah.
Bit of childhood trauma.
Actually, for those who are just listening, I showed my index finger and it's bent. And basically the picker is, when we when humans who want to be romantically involved, adults, they have preferences. And, well, I might want someone who's short, tall, Asian, Caucasian, educated. It doesn't matter. Everyone has preferences, and that's all conscious. But there is the unconscious preference that's stronger than all the conscious ones. And that is the one that pulls us into the type of lover that is more representative of the type of love we experienced when we were children. So when we, let's say, go on like an internet date or, and, we feel what we call as chemistry. Chemistry is the unconscious reaction of what feels familiar and what familiar is safe. So if you're born in a really dysfunctional family and you survived as a child by just becoming selfless or like the good child, the hero child, someone who's moldable, you learned growing up that safety is by making yourself likable. And so let's say you meet someone in public and, they're smiling and they're within your conscious choices. If they talk a lot and are bold and confident and charismatic, you won't say, oh my gosh, a narcissist, yay. No, you'll go, oh, wow, he's so attractive or she's so sexy, she's so nice. And you will see all these wonderful traits that someone who didn't have a broken picker would have seen as red flags. And that's the broken picker, is that you're choosing someone who feels right, who feels safe, but you're responding to cues that are more unconscious that you're oblivious to until it's too late.
And some of these characteristics that narcissistic personality disorder people have are just very charming and charismatic.
Well, no, that's not exactly true. Yes, it is true and it's not true. So in my book, I talk about the 3 personality disorders that codependence.
Can you explain that? Yeah.
Yes, and so there are 3 different disorders, but they all have a narcissistic core. One is narcissistic personality disorder, entitled and they think they're smart and better. They need to talk. They're vain. They're full of themselves. Big ego, narcissistic personality disorder. Then there is borderline personality disorder, who are people who are really sensitive to anything that might feel like rejection or abandonment. So if they are criticized, sometimes not even bad, they like have a sharp, rageful reaction, and then they try to hurt the people that they love, sometimes destroy it, and then they cycle back into loving them. So that's borderline personality disorder. An antisocial personality disorder is known, what we kind of call sociopaths. These are the charming con artists who pretend to be something they're not, who actually know what they're doing and are trying to manipulate you to like them. They know it. So yeah, some codependents fall in love with the sociopaths. It's one of those 3 narcissistic personality disordered individuals. Some are charming, some are not.
Right. I had the opportunity to meet one, and I can completely understand why people fall for him, because the way he'd look into my eyes and said, no one was able to make me feel this way. You're the only person. And right away, red flags, right?
Yeah. It's the intuition that the codependent. So let's say, to me, by the way, healthy, my definition of healthy is someone who has problems. Everyone has problems. So healthy is someone who has problems that talks to someone to solve them, tries to solve them themselves. If not, goes talk to someone. So when I say healthy, I'm talking about normal. Okay.
Right. With that spectrum that we have challenges in life. Yeah.
Right. So, but someone who is codependent, or what I call self-love deficient, they will react to this charming sociopath and they'll get this feeling like, oh my gosh, he is so beautiful and so sincere. It's chemistry. It's his instinct. Whereas someone who's healthy is going to get this weird feeling like, uh-oh, something's wrong.
Right.
And that's the unconscious way our mind works. It depends on our mental health. And the type of it is if we actually respond to these narcissists, or we react like 2 similar magnets you push away.
That's very interesting. I learned a new word from your title, which was limerence.
Limerence, yeah. Yeah, well, I don't take credit for that. That is from Dorothy Tenoff, who wrote a lot of books. Limerence is a completely human, universal across every type of culture, ethnicity, race. It is built into our DNA and our evolution. When we meet someone and there is a match, now the match could be two healthy people or the dysfunctional narcissist and codependent. But when there is a romantic match, we go into this almost euphoric, dreamlike, I call it drug-like euphoria, where you just want to spend time with them. Everyone knows about this. It's in movies and songs. You can't stop thinking about them. You can't sleep. You can't eat, and you just crave them. That is human. And if you're healthy, you get that with someone who's also healthy. But for codependents and narcissists, I call it limerence on crack. In other words, limerence that is exponential, because what it takes a depressed, lonely, sad codependent and all of a sudden fills them with this euphoria, and it's shared by the narcissist. So both of them get to escape their miserable lives into this relationship, but only one at the end of the day gets to be happy.
But when you talked about limerence, it really does sound like every start of a relationship. Does it not?
It is a human trait that is a part of our species, that we are wired that way. So it doesn't matter if you have really good mental health or you're a codependent or a narcissist. When and I quote this, fall in love, you have a crush or there's chemistry, you get swept away in this euphoric feeling that kind of feels timeless. Now, it normally lasts, I call healthy people, normal people, anywhere from 2 weeks to like 3 months. Then it turns into a stable relationship, and you could actually see the difference in a person's brain. Instead of the dopamine pleasure centers being lit up, it's an evolution that is just purely human. And so, but for the codependent, when it transitions away from limerence and out of into post-limerence, I don't even know if there's a name for it, just regular friendship, romantic love, that is when all the disappointment comes in. That is when they realize that the person is not who they thought they were, but they're unable to get out of the relationship, both by being manipulated and their fear of being lonely. And so the limerence goes, they're trapped, whereas healthy people, limerence goes, and you go to the next stage of a relationship, which is equally nice and cool.
Mm-hmm. So do you think it lasts the same as quote unquote normal relationship, this type of dysfunctional relationship, or does it last longer?
Actually, you know what? Actually, I tried to answer your question before you asked it. So do you think limerence lasts longer with codependents and narcissists? I'm sorry, I interrupt you. I apologize. Can you ask that question again?
Yes, that was exactly my question.
Okay.
Do you think it lasts longer for them?
It does not, because the limerence for the codependent and the narcissist, for the codependent, is not based upon factual information. It's based upon fantasy. So let me first talk about normal people. Again, normal people have problems. You know, you have a crush, you know, chemistry, you fall in love, and I quote, fall in love, and you experience limerence. And then during that time, you get to know each other and you're building the relationship, you're building the friendship. So when limerence starts to fade, you are feeling closer and more connected. Whereas for the codependent, when limerence fades, they're starting to see the true nature of the narcissist. And then they're feeling their true nature of neediness and fear of loneliness. So it doesn't last as long, because there are the narcissist's negative personality traits that kind of pop the bubble, burst the bubble, bring them down to reality.
Okay. I've worked at battered women's shelter. I volunteered at battered women's shelter when I lived in the United States for 7 years. And I've seen a lot of times the bubble doesn't really burst. It does, but then it doesn't. It's like when they come back and they become that charming self again.
What you're talking about are women or men who are codependent, who fall in love with narcissists. And all of a sudden, you know, the love cloud breaks away into storms, and the narcissist acts mean, nasty, selfish, codependent, sad, hurt. But they seem to reconnect in love. And I quote love because love is subjective. They both keep coming back to that. And the codependent convinces herself or himself. It's unconscious. I know this because it happened to me more so than I wanted. I even want to admit to, where you get lost in denial. You disassociate from your anger and denial. I used to joke and say it was an acronym, denial. Don't even know I am lying.
Right.
Yeah, and so you have denial because the pain of the truth is you picked another loser, another bad guy. And I know this because that's what I did. That to admit that it's just too painful. So you push it out and you don't think about it. You keep making excuses. And so that's what you're talking about is these women or men who are codependent who keep getting hurt from the narcissist. They get mad, they get upset, and then they come back. It's built into the codependency. It's what they're used to. It's what they experience going all the way back to their childhood when they learned what I call is the relationship template. So yeah, that's why it makes no sense to people watching them and how they can keep going back to the same harmful treatment.
Right. And I think it's a good opportunity to speak out to people who have friends in that situation, that it might take a long time for them to hit rock bottom, but if we can be supportive all throughout that process, it'll help them leave that person easier.
But sometimes not.
Sometimes not. But if we're critical of them, that's just definitely pushing them back to that person.
And let me explain, because one of the core causes of codependency is shame. Core shame is this fundamental belief that you're broken, you're not good enough, you're not worthy of love. And most codependents have that. Even the ones that are successful, they might be, push really hard to be good at something, but if something happens, they'll go to that shame. So by holding them accountable or trying to get them to understand, they want to avoid the shame. And so what'll happen is the codependent will cut off the relationship from the person who's trying to help them. And the person who's trying to help them doesn't understand what's going on. It's because they don't have the mental health to face that they fell in love with the person that hurts them so much and actually love them. And so they have to deny it. And they have to somehow keep idealizing or putting on a pedestal the narcissist that hurts them.
Right. So I can remember a few examples. Of people whose parents were against the marriage, and then they became, the relationship becomes abusive and it's hard to leave because of that shame. And I guess what I'm trying to say is if you're friends and family, it's not a time to be critical, because that does not help the situation at all, even if what that person's doing makes no sense whatsoever.
And what I suggest is not, it might sound like opportunist who wants to sell books, but I mean this from the bottom of my heart, is suggest a copy of my book. And I get goosebumps because, I wrote this thing 13 years ago, and just the idea that it's the very first time that someone explains it to them and they understand, because I didn't understand it and I was a therapist and I thought I was smart. But if you give them a copy of the book and they read it, they will understand. And with that understanding, there's a stronger potential probability for them to go to therapy and talk about it, because they're not going to break up if they don't understand those unconscious bonds, tethers, ropes that keep them tied to the narcissist. Okay.
Yes, I highly recommend, because a lot of times if you try to explain to your friend might feel shame or any other kind of emotions. They feel worse than you, feel like you're judging. So presenting him or her with a book that explains the logistics and sort of takes the shame and emotions out of it. It's like, this is what happens. It's not really your fault. You just have a broken picker. And why do you have that? It's because of this. And I think it's definitely helpful. Can you talk about, people want to ask, is there a personality type that's more associated of being in either a narcissistic person or a codependent person?
So I wrote a third book, hasn't been translated yet to anything. In my latest book, The Codependency Revolution, I expand what I started to talk about that's in the book.
In this book?
It's crucial to simplify the definition of codependency, then understand there are personality differences. So the definition is very simple. It's a person who in their romantic or intimate relationships give most, if not all, the love, respect, caring, trust, and protection with hopes that it's mutual or reciprocal. And because it's with a narcissist, it's not, and they stay in a relationship. So codependency is someone who gives the love, respect, caring, trust, protection. It's not returned, and they stay in a relationship. So that explains all types of codependence. And then I talk about personality types. So there is the what I call the passive codependent. And that is the one that like wants everyone to get along, tries to make everyone happy, believes in peace and forgiveness, and just tries to like sweep everything under the rug. And they're just sacrificial. Then there's the active codependent who argues, who tries to show the narcissist they're wrong, who tries to prove that they're right, who's always involved in a power struggle. So you think of these two personality types, they're different, but they both have a history of falling in love with narcissists who don't love, respect, care, trust, or protect them, and who they do all of it. So they have the same disorder, but they have different personality types. And then there's actually 10 more, and I'll only go with 2 more. There's then the cerebral one who relies on intellect, who reads and reads and reads, goes to therapy, goes to coaches, and is constantly trying to fill themselves with information. So that is their escape. And then there is the oblivious one who, like an ostrich, well, at least I think, I've never seen an ostrich do it, so I don't know if it's true, but we'll put its head in the sand, and we believe because
denial.
he thinks, denial. And so the point is, codependence comes, and I quote this, in all sizes and shapes. They have different personality types, but what makes them codependent is their historical chronic tendency to fall in love with narcissists and stay with them despite feeling starved with the love, respect, caring, trust, and protection they give.
Right. When we talk about this type of relationship, how the human magnet syndrome, something else came to mind, because the topic of cult is pretty much at the forefront of our news recently. So, and I know that Dr. Yang, who's the cult expert, had talked about one-on-one cult, which sounds a lot like being in a dysfunctional relationship.
So I am going to guess, because I understand, I'm not an expert, but I understand cult leaders and I understand the inner psychological mechanics of cults. So I'm going to assume what she means on the one-on-one is the sociopath falling in love with the codependent.
Right.
And through charisma, lies, promises, being greater than they really are. So I'm going to assume without knowing anything. So in other words, I could be wrong.
I do agree with you, because when I was reading your book, it occurred to me, it does sound like her idea of a one-on-one cult, because that social manipulation, the way they make you feel, the way you're unable to escape because of threats.
Yeah. So let me explain something. So the human magnet syndrome brings the codependent to the cult leader, to the pathological narcissist. And now let's just talk about pathological narcissists who are sociopathic, like cult leaders. So the human magnet syndrome gets them to the dance. Then what keeps them there is what the sociopath or the cult leader does. So the gaslighting, the mind control, those are techniques that break down the will of a person, that takes away their or incapacitates them and takes away their self-esteem. Those are techniques that are systematically employed to create the person who is entrapped in a cult, or the person who's gaslit and trapped in a relationship with a narcissist. So it's as much as it's the human magnet syndrome that gets there, but it's the sociopathic
psychological manipulation, right? That keeps them.
That glues them even more than just the codependency fear of being alone.
So I have one question, because reading about cults and then reading your book, there is something that I wonder, because a lot of cult experts talked about how anyone, right, without talking about being a human magnet, anyone can fall under a prey for cult leaders. If you're vulnerable, if you're having a bad day, if you're depressed at a time, because the gaslighting, and if you're in an environment that you're not supported. So it sounds like anyone in that situation and in that state of mind could slowly be lured into a cult. Whereas I think your thesis is more, hey, you're being attracted to this type of personality. What keeps you there is the psychological manipulation.
So let me bring together what you said are differences. So anyone who is susceptible, who's depressed, who has low self-esteem, who is lost, is susceptible to the manipulative techniques of a sociopath or a cult leader or a narcissist. So that really doesn't mean anyone. It's people who are vulnerable. But if you are strong, have self-esteem, have social networks, and strong relationships with friends, family, those people are not susceptible. It is the weaker ones that are. So I don't believe that if you have those psychological strengths, it almost is like Teflon, and that's the stuff you have on pans that make things slip off. That's probably bad for you, by the way. At least that's what someone told me. But yeah, so really, the people who are sad, lonely, and vulnerable, yes, they are dangerously in trouble and weak and vulnerable to these type of people. But I always leave room for people to disagree.
Okay. No, that's great. It makes all of us think whether or not we could potentially be in that situation and what we should look out for. So I know we don't have a whole lot of time left. I have two very quick questions. One is, how do I know I'm in this type of relationship? And what's a red flag that I need to look out for? And lastly, the most important thing that this book is trying to do is to empower people to be able to find strength to leave the relationship. So can you talk about how do I know I'm in this relationship and how do I leave?
So I have ADHD, so I need to take one question at a time.
Okay. Let's do, how do I know? How do I know this is a dysfunctional relationship?
So it actually goes back to the importance of the definition and why I put so much emphasis on people using that definition to determine if someone is codependent or not, because personality traits are confusing. You can have really confident, outgoing codependents, and you can have like really shy, nervous. So to know if someone's codependent is just ask the question, what is the distribution of love, respect, caring, trust, and protection? It never is exactly equal 50-50. That's like in the movies. But if there is some level of mutuality, that means it's not a personality disorder and a codependent. But the codependent narcissist relationship, if you take away the thoughts about personality, because you can get lost and fooled by personality. And it's the question I'll ask. So in this relationship, who gives the most love, respect, caring, trust, and protection? And they'll go about personality. I say, no, forget the personality. Just answer those questions. And they'll go, oh, well, she does. And then it almost always matches up with the codependent and narcissist. Now, there's what I call the reverse diagnosis technique, is when it's like a relative or a friend and who you know but you don't know, and you're confused. Then you have to ask, what are their partners? What are their boyfriends like, or what are their husband or wives like? And then if their boyfriends are always the selfish ones and the controlling ones and the rude ones, well, there you go. Or if they're always the caring, giving, and so if you can just simplify it, that's how you know. Most people who are codependent are in denial. They don't want to admit it, that they want to believe that this person truly loves them. And it's not until they get beaten down and hit a bottom that sometimes they open up. And that is when going to YouTube, reading my book, that is when there's a moment, an opportunity for them to go, oh my gosh, this is who I am. And that's the moment, that's the awakening.
Something else came to mind because talking to a narcissistic person, he made it sound like his partner was the most selfish person
We call
in
that
the world.
projection.
His partner is not catering to his every single need. So that's betrayal, that's selfish. So I'm curious, when you say, how do you describe your partner? We can almost see that would projection be something we need to take into consideration?
Okay. So let's just acknowledge that if someone is a full-blown codependent and you ask them, is he a narcissist and are you codependent? They're in denial. They don't want to accept the truth. So the only way that you are going to know is by doing an objective analysis, or if that person's in therapy and you can help them see what is objectively true. So projection is a defense mechanism that's common with people with narcissistic personality disorder. They see in others what they hate about themselves the most. So narcissists don't like people that talk too much. They don't like show-offs. They don't like people that brag. They get really mad and accuse people of being selfish. That's really their own reactions to themselves that they'll never know. That's projection. They don't know they're doing it. Then there's another way of looking at that, which is gaslighting. And that's different from projection. People are gaslighters. They know what they're doing. So they're usually sociopaths. It's not projection. They are getting the codependent to believe that there's something wrong with themselves and trying to prove it. So once that codependent believes it, they feel weaker and more incapacitated, and then the narcissist controls them. That's what the sociopath narcissist does to a codependent. The narcissist who has narcissistic personality disorder is projection. And when the codependent starts to agree with the projection, we call that projective identification. So both ways, a codependent is susceptible to believing things about themselves that the narcissist tries to get them to believe. That's not true.
Right. I would like you to end by talking to those people, talking to the codependent who are trapped in this relationship, because I know some people are, but because they already have kids or they already have a certain age, for whatever reason or shame, they don't feel like they're capable of leaving, or they can. Okay. Can you speak directly to them?
Absolutely. To you out there who are listening or watching, I speak to you not as an intellectual, as a teacher, as a therapist, as a writer, but as a survivor of the insanity of codependency. I fell prey to my own codependency where I could not see what was true. I twisted in my own mind reality. I made someone who was mean and not nice and bad to me, I made them good because I was afraid of accepting the truth. And that is, I'm really lonely. I feel like people don't really care about me, and that I have really hard memories of my childhood that I try to forget. So I say to you that if you are a codependent who keeps falling in love with narcissists, this is a disorder. It can be cured. And the first step is to know who you are and why this happens. There's no shame in admitting it. There's no shame at knowing that you're broken in a way that you are trying to outrun loneliness. You're trying to hide from the truth, but you're strong enough to face the truth. You can be broken, and what I call, you can break wide open. And then from there, you can heal and find self-love and find for the first time that you are so much worth someone loving and respecting you, but you got to figure out a way how to love yourself. So get some help, find a therapist, find someone who can show you that you truly are lovable just because you are you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rosenberg. This is very helpful. And for those of you watching out there, if you are someone stuck in that kind of relationship, or you know of someone, instead of being a therapist yourself, when most of us aren't qualified, recommend this book. Purchase this book for your friend, for yourself. Understand the logistics so you know what situation you're in and how to empower yourself, and also seek help. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much.